So I want you to start by just taking a quick mental inventory of your day so far. Just really think about it for a second.
Right.
Like, how many times have you reflexively reached into your pocket just to check your phone for a notification?
Probably more than anyone wants to admit.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Or, did you use a GPS app today to get somewhere? Even like a place you've driven to a dozen times before.
Yeah, the classic autopilot mode.
Right. Or maybe you grabbed a quick, hyper-convenient snack out of some brightly colored, crinkly wrapper. Or, and this is a big one, perhaps you were scrolling through a social feed and felt that sudden familiar spike of like absolute outrage at a headline.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like a perfectly normal Tuesday for most people, in the modern world.
Totally normal.
We don't even process these actions anymore. They're simply the background radiation of contemporary life.
But see, that's exactly why we're here today. Welcome to Deep Dive AI. We are partners with the multimedia production company Bald and Bonkers Network, LLC. And today, our mission is to look at that exact, quote-unquote, normal routine through a microscope that is honestly going to make you very, very uncomfortable.
Yeah, prepare yourselves.
Seriously, because we have an absolutely massive stack of research sitting right in front of us, and it's all anchored by this highly provocative, deeply unsettling 2026 research proposal. It was compiled by Dakota Franson.
Right, and the core argument here, it isn't just that modern life is, distracting. I mean, Franson is proposing something much more radical.
Radical is definitely the right word, because what we're looking at is a proposal for the formal, literal taxonomic reclassification of contemporary hominids.
It's wild. Franson's overarching thesis is that humanity is not just stalling in its evolutionary progress. We are, in fact, rapidly and measurably devolving.
Devolving, like going backward.
Exactly, going backward. The assertion in this paper is that a convergence of technological, dietary, and environmental factors has essentially initiated the biological emergence of a distinct, devolved subspecies.
And the working title for this new biological classification, I still can't get over this, is Homo sapiens Moronus.
Yeah, Homo sapiens Moronus.
I mean, when I first read that, I thought, okay, this has to be a joke, right? Like satire.
Well, it sounds exactly like a punchline.
But then you start digging into the actual data backing this up, and man, the humor vanishes immediately. It's chilling. So we are going to spend this deep dive exploring what Franson describes as a multi-front assault on the hominid brain.
And it really is multi-front.
Yeah, we're talking about digital lobotomies, literal GPS-induced brain shrinkage, algorithms that hack our emotional centers, diets that just rot our cognitive hardware.
Plus the ambient microplastic pollution.
Right, and even the suffocating architecture of the buildings we literally live and work in. We are looking at a total systems failure of the human cognitive landscape.
And, to really understand the gravity of this, we need to contrast it with how evolution normally operates.
Okay, set the baseline for us.
So, classical evolution, like the kind driven by natural selection, is typically all about adaptation to enhance survival.
Right.
And reproductive fitness. So for 300,000 years, Homo sapiens evolved toward progressive encephalization.
Encephalization, meaning bigger, better brains.
Basically, yeah. It means we developed denser prefrontal cortices, enhanced neuroplasticity, and these highly complex spatial and social processing capabilities. We were getting smarter.
Right.
But the emergence of Homo sapiens Moronus operates on an entirely inverted mechanism. It is the product of self-imposed systemic cognitive offloading and, environmental neurotoxicity.
So we aren't adapting to survive a hostile environment anymore.
No, we are engineering an environment that directly causes our own biological regression.
Okay, so let's start with the most immediate constant interface altering our brains right now, our screens. The proposal starts with this concept of the, quote, digital lobotomy.
Yeah, that's a heavy term.
It is. And we're looking at research pioneered by people like Dr. Manfred Spitzer defining a phenomenon they call digital dementia. And I really want to pause on that phrase because when I think of dementia, I think of my grandfather.
Right, a degenerative disease.
Yeah. I think of a disease that actively destroys the brain. So are they using the word dementia here metaphorically to say we're just forgetful, or is it biological?
They are using it biologically, but the mechanism of action is completely inverted compared to what your grandfather probably experienced.
Wait, how do you mean?
So when we think of traditional dementia like Alzheimer's disease, we're looking at the progressive biological destruction of specific neural networks, usually cholinergic and glutamatergic neurons.
Okay.
And that's usually driven by protein plaques building up. It's a very active disease process. But this digital dementia that Franzen outlines, it's actually a fundamental feature of the brain working exactly as it's supposed to, just against us.
Working against
Yeah.
us.
It is neuroplasticity operating in reverse.
Okay, hold on. Unpack that, because we always hear neuroplasticity thrown around as like a positive buzzword on health blogs. You know, it's the brain's ability to change and adapt and stay young, right?
Exactly.
So how does that possibly work in reverse?
Well, the hominid brain is fundamentally a use it or lose it organ. Right? It evolved to encode, store, and retrieve complex environmental data.
Right, for survival.
Right. So when you learn something new, your brain creates a new synaptic connection. And when you recall that information later, you strengthen that exact connection.
Okay, makes sense.
This active process of retrieval is what maintains the physical integrity of the brain's wiring. So if you stop retrieving information because you, say, rely on an external device, like your phone, neuroplasticity dictates that the brain will actively prune those synaptic connections to save energy.
Wow, so it's like having a muscle.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Like if I break my arm, right, and I put it in a
Mhm.
cast for 6 months, I don't suddenly have a muscle disease. But when that cast comes off, the muscle has physically wasted away simply from disuse.
Exactly, it atrophies.
And the brain is doing the exact same thing because of what Franzen calls the Google effect or digital amnesia. We are treating our smartphones like they are literal external hard drives for our brains.
We really are. Think about it. If I ask you a random trivia question right now or ask for your best friend's phone number, you probably don't actually search your memory for the answer.
No, I definitely don't. I just think, oh, I'll search for it online or I'll check my contacts. I just remember where to find the information.
Precisely. The brain is failing to encode the actual information into its long-term memory banks because the biological imperative to do so has been removed.
Because the phone is doing it for us.
Right. The cognitive effort of recall is completely offloaded to the device. And, this isn't just a benign quirk of modern convenience. It has devastating structural consequences, particularly for Generation Z and millennials.
Right, because their brains are actively going through those critical neurodevelopmental windows. We're talking about developing brains being subjected to, what, an average of 6 to 8 hours a day on these devices?
Easily 6 to 8 hours, sometimes more.
It feels like we're treating the modern human brain like a computer's RAM, like the short-term transient memory.
That's a really good way to visualize it.
The RAM is just constantly spinning, processing this endless rapid-fire feed of TikToks and tweets, but the system has completely forgotten how to actually write any permanent data to the hard drive.
Yeah, the save function is essentially broken.
And the paper mentions this leads to anterograde amnesia,
Mhm.
which is the inability to form new memories, and retrograde amnesia, the inability to access old ones.
Exactly. And the structural degradation, it goes beyond just the memory centers. We are seeing a marked physical decrease in the integrity of white matter tracks.
Wait, let me stop you there, because I feel like I always hear about gray matter when people talk about brain power or, intelligence.
Yeah, gray matter gets all the PR.
Right. So what exactly is white matter doing, and why is losing it so dangerous?
That's a great question. So gray matter is where the actual processing is done. It contains the neuron cell bodies. It's the computers in the network.
Okay, the computers.
But white matter is the brain's communication network. It is this vast subcellular subway system of insulated cables called axons that connect all those different regions of gray matter together so they can actually talk to each other.
Oh, so it's the fiber optic cables connecting the computers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you rely on this hyperlinked, incredibly fast-paced media, you basically train the brain to only superficially scan information.
Right, no deep reading anymore.
Right. You prioritize rapid, transient dopamine spikes over deep, sustained cognitive engagement. And this chronic cognitive underuse directly degrades that white matter.
Meaning the cables are fraying.
Yes. The processing centers can no longer communicate efficiently. And this leads to measurable deficits in complex language skills, critical thinking, and crucially, emotional regulation.
And this leads us to the epidemiological projections in the paper, which are genuinely terrifying.
Yeah, they are grim.
Because if we are structurally degrading our memory and communication networks right now, what happens in 30 years? The CDC currently has models estimating like a twofold increase in Alzheimer's and related dementias by 2060.
Right.
But Franson argues these estimates are dangerously obsolete. Like, they aren't even close.
They are completely obsolete. And the reason is that the CDC's baseline estimates are built almost entirely on population cohorts that were born prior to 1950.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. Those individuals did not have their brains develop in the presence of mobile digital technology.
No, of course not. They didn't have iPads in the crib.
Exactly. They spent their critical developmental years reading long-form text, navigating physical environments, utilizing their internal memory. So Franson adjusts these predictive models to account for the actual neurodevelopmental reality of modern adolescents.
The iPad babies.
Right. And when you factor in the altered gray and white matter volumes that result from this chronic sensory overstimulation and cognitive offloading, the projection just jumps exponentially.
What's the new number?
He models a 4 to 6-fold increase in early onset dementia and mild cognitive impairment over the coming decades.
A 4 to 6-fold increase. I mean, you listening, just pause and really think about the societal implications of that. That is a volume of neurodegeneration that would completely shatter global healthcare systems by the end of this century.
Oh, the infrastructure couldn't handle it. Not even close.
We are literally watching the human memory network atrophy in real time.
And, it isn't just our internal encyclopedia that we've outsourced. If our internal hard drive is failing, well, our internal compass is completely offline too.
Which brings us to the second pillar of the Homo sapiens Moronus phenotype, spatial de-evolution and the death of the allocentric map.
Yes, the GPS problem.
Right. So GPS use causes the brain to atrophy. Now, let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Because I get in the car, I plug in an address, and I just blindly follow the blue line on the screen. And it's incredibly efficient. I almost never get lost anymore. So why does it matter if I can't navigate without my phone as long as I get to my destination? Isn't that just like a technological upgrade?
I mean, it seems like an upgrade until you look at what is actively happening to the biological tissue inside your skull.
Okay, tell me what's happening to my tissue.
To understand why this is so catastrophic, we have to look at the mechanics of human navigation. Evolutionary spatial mastery was heavily reliant on the hippocampus. Specifically, the right medial temporal lobe.
The hippocampus.
Right. The hippocampus governs what we call allocentric navigation.
Allocentric.
Yes. Allocentric navigation means you possess an internal map-based understanding of how landmarks and topographies relate to one another, completely independent of where you are currently standing.
Okay, so it's like knowing that the river is north of the mountain and the forest is to the east. And regardless of where I am personally dropped in that terrain, I can mentally rotate that map in my head and orient myself.
Exactly. You hold the map in your mind. And it's a highly demanding cognitive process. It relies on these specialized neurons called grid cells and place cells.
Right.
The discovery of these cells actually won the Nobel Prize in physiology a few years ago because they're literally the brain's internal biological GPS system.
Wow.
But modern smartphone GPS relies on something completely different. It relies on egocentric navigation.
Egocentric, meaning centered on the self.
Right. It's entirely a stimulus response mechanism. The robotic voice says, turn left in 100 meters, and you turn left. Proceed straight, and you proceed straight.
Yeah, you aren't visualizing the map at all. You're just waiting for the next command.
Exactly. It is a passive, reactive form of navigation that completely bypasses the hippocampal circuits.
It just outsources all the heavy lifting to the phone. And the paper notes it relies instead on the brain's caudate nucleus, right?
Yes, the caudate nucleus.
And that's the area of the brain associated with rigid habit-based behavior. So it's literally like an animal just reacting to a prompt for a reward.
Yeah. The caudate nucleus is part of the basal ganglia. It's essentially the brain's autopilot.
Right.
And the evolutionary so whats of switching from the hippocampus to the caudate nucleus is profound, because the hippocampus isn't just a biological compass. It is deeply fundamentally integrated into the regulation of episodic memory, imagination, and even the processing of psychological stress.
So it does a lot more than just give directions.
So much more. And when you deprive this massive neural network of stimulation by just passively following a blue line on a screen, neuroplasticity kicks in again. Habitual GPS reliance induces rapid atrophy, literal physical volume loss, in the right hippocampus.
The structural decay is actively happening, and Franson highlights these structural MRI scans in the proposal, specifically looking at something called T1 relaxation rates.
Yes, the T1 data.
I need you to break this down for me, because this part completely blew my mind. It's not just that the brain region is getting smaller, the tissue itself is like metabolically failing.
Yeah, let's unpack that. So T1, pronounced T1 rho, is a highly specialized type of magnetic resonance imaging,
Okay.
and it is exceptionally sensitive to regional pH levels and metabolic changes in soft tissue.
So it can see the chemical environment of the brain.
Exactly. And what it reveals in these studies is that poor wayfinding, this complete lack of active allocentric navigation, is strongly linked to localized acidosis in the right hippocampus.
Acidosis, meaning the brain tissue is literally becoming more acidic.
Yes. When a brain region is severely underutilized, its metabolic clearance systems begin to falter. The tissue becomes more acidic, which represents severe metabolic dysfunction.
That sounds incredibly dangerous.
It is. This localized acidosis acts as a direct precursor to broader neuropathological burdens. It is a toxic chemical environment that fosters the death of neurons and essentially invites the onset of cognitive decline.
It's basically the canary in the coal mine for dementia.
Exactly.
And the ultimate proof of this, like the control group, if you will, are the London taxi drivers.
Oh yes, the classic neuroscience example.
Right, we always hear about them. They have to memorize the entire insane, winding layout of London without any digital aid whatsoever. It's this grueling process called the knowledge.
Right.
And their brains show the exact opposite of what we are doing to ourselves. Their posterior hippocampi are significantly enlarged.
Because they are actively, daily, continuously training that allocentric network.
Right.
But by willingly ceding our daily movement to GPS algorithms, Homo sapiens Moronus is allowing an ancient, incredibly vital brain structure to just wither into a state of metabolic acidosis.
We are inadvertently stripping away our own physical autonomy.
Exactly. And because the hippocampus is so closely tied to memory and imagination, we're stripping away our brain's capacity to properly contextualize reality.
Okay, so follow the biological thread here for a second. We've lost our internal encyclopedia, and our memory is failing from the digital lobotomy.
Right.
We've outsourced our physical compass to the GPS, causing our hippocampus to physically shrink and become acidic.
Yes.
So what happens when we take that degraded, compromised neural network and try to navigate our social world?
Well, it gets ugly.
Extremely. Because Franzen argues that our social environment has been entirely hijacked by algorithms, which brings us to the third pillar. Algorithmic domestication and the outrage economy.
Right. And the central premise here is that the digital platforms dominating our modern communication do not function as neutral public squares.
They really want us to think they do, though.
Of course they do,
Well,
but they aren't. They are highly optimized behavioral conditioning environments. Their underlying architecture is explicitly, fundamentally designed to exploit primal dopaminergic reward pathways.
and the absolute primary fuel for those pathways, moral outrage. Now, evolutionary speaking, moral outrage wasn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Like, it had a very specific pro-social purpose in early human tribes.
Correct. In a tight-knit tribal setting, moral outrage enforced cooperation.
Right. It kept people in line.
Yeah, it motivated the group to punish a free rider or someone who transgressed against the community, and it spurred necessary social change. It was a crucial survival mechanism for the group.
But the digital habitat of Homo sapiens Moronus has completely commodified that emotion.
Completely. Social media platforms operate on a business model of maximizing user engagement to drive advertising revenue, period.
Right.
And nothing, absolutely nothing drives engagement and keeps human eyes glued to a screen quite like outrage.
And the research from Yale University that's cited in this proposal is just, it's incredibly illuminating here. I want to spend some time on this because they looked at millions of digital interactions.
Millions.
Imagine the researchers tracking millions of posts. And the wild part is they didn't care what the posts were actually about. They weren't looking at the politics or the subject matter. They were looking at a specific behavioral loop.
Exactly.
And they basically proved that these networks use reinforcement learning to train us, exactly like lab rats in a maze, to express moral outrage.
Yes. The Yale study is a perfect, terrifying demonstration of D.F. Skinner's operant conditioning,
Yeah.
just scaled up to billions of people.
How does the loop actually work biologically?
Well, when an individual posts something indignant, right?
Yeah.
Something expressing intense moral outrage, and then they receive likes or shares or retweets, that is quantifiable social feedback.
It's validation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it hits the brain's ventral striatum, which is the reward center, with a massive dopamine spike.
And this feedback trains the brain. The statistical models in the study show that if you receive elevated positive feedback for an outraged post today, you are, what, 2% to 3% more likely to exhibit outrage in your subsequent interactions the very next day.
Yes, a 2% to 3% increase in likelihood.
Now, you listening might hear 2% to 3% and think, well, that doesn't sound like a lot. But compound that daily, compound it over weeks, months, and years of endless scrolling.
It's exponential.
It's exactly like pulling the lever on a slot machine.
Yeah.
You don't know which outraged post is going to hit the jackpot of social validation, so you just keep pulling the lever, constantly escalating the rhetoric to get that dopamine hit.
Right.
It creates a psychophysiologic state that mirrors severe substance addiction.
And this brings us to the physiological mechanism that Franson describes as the amygdala hijack.
The amygdala hijack.
Yeah. This constant algorithmic conditioning actively suppresses prefrontal executive control.
Okay, remind us what the prefrontal cortex does.
The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain responsible for reasoned discourse, complex problem solving, empathy, and long-term planning. It's the adult in the room.
Right.
But the architecture of these platforms suppresses the prefrontal cortex in favor of the amygdala and the striatum. And those structures drive reflexive, highly emotional, combative responses.
Think about what that actually means for us as a species. You aren't just a user anymore. To the algorithm, you've been completely domesticated.
Your livestock.
Exactly. You are just a predictable node in their network, literally trained to generate revenue by being chronically angry. And I want to make this explicitly clear to you listening. The algorithm does not care what you are outraged about.
Not at all.
It is completely indifferent to the content, the ethics, or the political leaning. Left, right, center, it literally does not matter. The algorithm's only goal is to fracture your attention span, erode your critical thinking, and keep you engaged on the platform.
And this raises a really crucial point from the data about who is actually most vulnerable to this domestication.
Yeah, this part surprised me.
You might assume it's the fringes, right?
Yeah.
The extremists. But the research highlights the radicalization of the moderates.
Wait, really? The moderates?
Yes. Extreme ideological groups tend to operate on what we call norm learning. They simply conform to the already outrageous norms of their specific isolated echo chamber. They're already there.
Okay, so they've already peaked.
Exactly. But politically moderate users, those with diverse networks and previously nuanced views, they are highly, highly sensitive to the operant conditioning of reinforcement learning.
Because they haven't been fully conditioned yet.
Right. They're the ones being systematically radicalized by the architecture of the platform itself. They're continually pushed toward the extremes just to chase the dopamine of engagement.
So the ultimate goal of the algorithm is the complete loss of cognitive flexibility in the user. We stop communicating through factual analysis, and instead we just engage in these conditioned spasms of hyper-partisan indignance.
We prioritize immediate, quantifiable social validation over empirical truth,
We are losing the biological hardware required to even have a nuanced thought.
which serves as a perfect transition.
Yeah.
Because the digital inputs, the screens, the GPS, the algorithms, they are hacking our behavioral software.
Right.
But Franson argues that while the software is being hijacked, our modern physical environment is simultaneously rotting the biological hardware.
Yes, which leads us to the fourth pillar, the synthetic biome and cognitive ruin.
We are talking about diet.
But we aren't just talking about like eating too many calories or needing to go on a diet to lose a few pounds. We are talking about the complete chemical alteration of the global food supply. Let's talk about ultra-processed foods, or UPFs.
All right. And to understand the cognitive impact here, we have to precisely define what a UPF actually is using the Novier food classification system.
Novier.
Yes. Novier groups food into 4 categories, scaling from unprocessed whole foods all the way up to group 4, which are the ultra-processed foods.
And just to be clear here, we aren't talking about canning some beans or freezing some peas to preserve them. That's not UPF.
No, not at all. UPFs are industrially manufactured formulations. They are chemically engineered substances that just happen to be edible.
They are food-like substances.
Exactly. They're loaded with refined sugars, saturated fats, industrial dietary emulsifiers, artificial flavorings, and preservatives.
Yeah.
But more importantly, their original cellular structure has been completely obliterated.
So they have no nutritional matrix left.
None. They are completely devoid of intact fiber and bioactive compounds, and they're specifically engineered to be hyperpalatable, to completely bypass your body's natural satiety mechanisms.
So you never feel full, and you just keep eating them.
Precisely.
They are synthetic formulations masquerading as food. And they currently make up over 50% of the total caloric intake in industrialized nations. And the paper notes that in some demographics, it's as high as 70%.
Staggering.
And the epidemiological data connecting the synthetic diet directly to brain rot it's undeniable. Let's look at the Brazilian longitudinal study of adult health.
Oh, that's a massive study.
It is. This wasn't some small, short-term survey of college students. They tracked over 10,000 adults over an 8-year period, constantly administering rigorous cognitive assessments.
And the data from that massive cohort showed a terrifying correlation. Individuals consuming a high percentage of their daily energy from UPF specifically, more than 20% of their daily calories, experienced a 28% faster rate of global cognitive decline compared to those maintaining unprocessed whole food diets.
28% faster. I want to pause and force us to really connect the dots here because, intuitively, we all know junk food makes us physically fat or maybe a bit lethargic.
Right, the food coma.
Yeah. But how does eating a synthetic emulsifier in a highly processed snack at lunch physically alter my ability to formulate a complex thought at dinner? What is the actual biology happening inside the brain?
Well, Franson's paper outlines 4 overlapping biological mechanisms that explain exactly how this happens. The first mechanism is systemic inflammation and oxidative stress.
Okay.
High UPF intake promotes the continuous release of pro-inflammatory cytokines into the bloodstream.
Hold on, I need an ELI-5 explain like I'm 5 for cytokines because the paper lists things like TGF-1, TNF-G, reactive protein, and interleukin-6. What are these and what do they actually do?
Okay, think of cytokines as the body's chemical alarm bells.
Alarm bells. Got it.
Normally, they ring when you have a cut or viral infection. They tell the immune system to wake up, cause some localized inflammation, and attack the invader.
Right, and once the threat is gone, the alarm turns off.
Exactly. But ultra-processed foods, because they are recognized by the body as foreign synthetic compounds, they jam the alarm bell so it never stops ringing.
Oh, wow.
The immune system stays active indefinitely. It creates a state of chronic, low-grade fire throughout your entire body.
So the bloodstream is no longer just a delivery system for nutrients and oxygen. It has basically been transformed into a vector for chronic neuroinflammation. It is constantly bathing the brain in these inflammatory alarm chemicals.
Exactly. And that chronic inflammation is a central, massive contributor to neurodegeneration. Now, the second mechanism ties directly into this: gut-brain axis disruption.
Right. I hear about the gut microbiome all the time. People always call it the second brain.
And for good reason. The gut is lined with a very delicate barrier that decides what gets into your bloodstream and what stays in the digestive tract.
Okay.
But the artificial additives, the emulsifiers, and the severe lack of fiber in UPFs completely alter the composition of your gut microbiota. This creates a condition called gut dysbiosis, which leads to increased intestinal permeability.
Commonly known as leaky gut.
Yes, the barrier is compromised. It literally allows peripheral inflammation, undigested food particles, and bacterial toxins to leak right into the bloodstream and be pushed directly into the central nervous system via the vagus nerve.
Which leads us to the third mechanism, brain morphology alterations. And we are back to the brain physically shrinking again.
Unfortunately, yes.
Chronic exposure to these diets correlates with significant measurable reductions in hippocampal volume. And what's really crucial here is that this shrinkage is entirely independent of vascular risk factors like high blood pressure or diabetes.
Direct damage.
Right. The synthetic food itself is causing the brain's memory center to physically atrophy.
And the fourth mechanism is perhaps the most tragic from a societal perspective: adolescent executive deficits.
Because it's targeting the youth.
Right. Adolescence is a highly sensitive window for brain plasticity. Think about a teenager's brain. You have a neural architecture that already possesses a heightened ventral striatal reward reactivity.
Meaning they are biologically wired to seek out highly stimulating dopamine-rich rewards, whether that's social media, risky behavior, or hyperpalatable food.
Yes. But their prefrontal control, the rational brakes of the brain that say, stop, this is a bad idea, those are still developing. They don't fully mature until the mid-20s.
It's all gas and no brakes.
Exactly. And the epidemiological data shows that a mere 10% increase in daily UPF energy intake predicts a 0.11 standard deviation drop in composite executive function scores for these adolescents.
Wow.
The dietary environment is perfectly calibrated to suppress their developing executive function. It physically shifts their behavior from goal-directed reasoning to blind habitual consumption.
So if you combine the algorithmic outrage hacking their dopamine loops with the ultra-processed food degrading their prefrontal cortex, You are engineering a generation that is biologically incapable of self-regulation.
It's a perfect storm.
But, if UPFs represent intentional consumption, like you actively choose to eat the snack, the next pillar of the Homo sapiens Moronus phenotype represents inescapable ambient toxicity.
Yes, the environmental factor.
We are moving from the synthetic biome to what Franson calls the polymerization of the brain.
We are talking about microplastics.
Yeah.
This is the ubiquitous inhalation and ingestion of micro and nanoplastics. They are in the global food chain, they are in our municipal water supplies, they are in the rain, and they are in the air we breathe indoors and outdoors.
It is an inescapable toxicological matrix.
It really is. For decades, neuroscientists relied on the concept of the blood-brain barrier, the BBB. It was believed to be this impenetrable biological fortress protecting the delicate central nervous system from circulating toxins in the blood.
Right, a literal wall.
But this pathology has proven that the fortress has been completely breached.
How are they getting in?
Because these nanoplastics are so incredibly small, they can slip right through the cellular tight junctions of the blood-brain barrier. And they have a secondary trick. They form what the paper calls biomolecular coronas.
Biomolecular coronas, what is that?
So, when a piece of nanoplastic enters the bloodstream, proteins and lipids naturally attach to its surface. It basically forms a cloak.
The cloak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This cloak disguises the plastic, tricking the blood-brain barrier into thinking it is a vital nutrient, allowing it to easily cross right into the brain tissue. They even cross the placental barrier into fetal brain tissue.
Oh my God. And the autopsy data. I genuinely shuddered reading this part. You listening, stop whatever you are doing and listen to this.
It's deeply unsettling. The autopsy studies utilize these novel quantification methods on human brains, and they detected up to 7 grams of microplastics in a single human brain sample.
Hold on. 7 grams. I want you to really visualize that for a second. If you took a standard plastic credit card, ran it through a microshredder until it was microscopic dust, and then somehow injected that plastic dust directly into the tissues of your brain, that is the volume we were talking about.
A literal credit card in the brain.
A shredded credit card sitting inside the organ that generates your consciousness, your memories, your personality. How is the brain not just shutting down instantly from that level of foreign debris?
Well, the brain is fighting a losing battle, and the volumes are accelerating rapidly. The data showed a 50% increase in plastic concentrations in human brain samples collected in 2024 compared to just 8 years prior in 2016.
So it's bioaccumulating at an exponential rate.
Exponentially. And the presence of these polymers, particularly polystyrene microplastics, initiates 5 catastrophic pathogenic mechanisms once they're inside the brain. First, we see the generation of reactive oxygen species, or ROS.
Which causes massive oxidative stress, lipid peroxidation, and DNA damage. It's essentially rusting the brain from the inside out.
Exactly. Second is microglial activation and pyroptosis.
Whoa, pyroptosis. I know what apoptosis is. That's just the normal programmed cell death that the body does to clean up old cells. But what is the pyro part? Does it mean fire?
It does. Microglia are the immune cells of the brain. When they encounter these undegradable plastic shards, they try to consume them to clean them up, but they can't digest them.
Right.
This triggers a highly inflammatory, explosive form of programmed cell death called pyroptosis. The cell literally ruptures, spilling inflammatory cytokines everywhere, which creates persistent chronic inflammation and damages the surrounding healthy neurons.
That is horrifying. The cells are basically blowing themselves up.
Yes.
And the third mechanism is actual physical cytoskeletal damage. The paper notes that these microscopic plastic shards are mechanically scratching, abrading, and destroying the myelin sheaths that insulate our neurons.
And severing the intracellular microtubules.
It is physical, mechanical trauma on a microscopic scale. You are getting hundreds of millions of microscopic cuts inside your brain every single day.
Fourth is neurotransmitter disruption. The presence of the plastics causes a severe downregulation in the gene expression of BDNF brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
BDNF. We are going to discuss BDNF heavily in a moment because it is the master protein absolutely vital for brain repair and neuroplasticity.
Yes, the plastics literally stop the brain from being able to heal itself.
And finally, the fifth mechanism, which explains the terrifying synergy between microplastics and dementia, pathological protein aggregation.
Yes, what happens is that the nanoplastics act as a physical scaffolding. In the brain, there are ambient amyloid beta and tau proteins. These are the proteins intimately associated with Alzheimer's disease when they misfold and clump together.
Okay.
The plastics provide an artificial surface for these neurodegenerative proteins to bind to. They aggregate around the plastic shards much, much faster than they would naturally.
Which perfectly explains the grim finding in the paper that neuropathological samples from individuals with advanced dementia had up to 10 times the concentration of microplastics compared to cognitively intact brains.
The synergy is devastating.
Because as the dementia naturally degrades the blood-brain barrier, it allows unimpeded exponential plastic accumulation, which then supercharges the misfolding of the Alzheimer's proteins. It's an unstoppable death spiral.
Franson is incredibly literal when he says, "We are a species with a polymerizing brain."
We are being systematically dismantled by our inputs, the digital interfaces, the inflammatory dietary formulations, and the ambient toxicological matrix.
But we also must consider the physical macrospaces where we're consuming all these inputs, which leads us to the concept of architectural asphyxiation.
This one is going to make you look at your office or your living room completely differently, because the data points out a simple, obvious fact. Homo sapiens moronus operates as a strictly indoor-dwelling organism.
We really do.
We spend an estimated 90% of our entire lifespan enclosed in artificially constructed environments.
And the evolution of modern architecture over the last 50 years has been driven primarily by initiatives to maximize energy efficiency. We want to reduce heating and cooling costs, so we seal the buildings. We build incredibly airtight boxes.
Right? No drafts.
But the unintended disastrous consequence of this architectural evolution is chronically inadequate ventilation.
We are trapping ourselves in boxes that perpetually accumulate indoor atmospheric pollutants because the HVAC systems just recycle the same air to save money on heating or cooling outside air.
Exactly.
So we are breathing in a concentrated soup of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which off-gas from synthetic carpets, paints, and furniture. And most importantly, we are breathing in concentrated exhaled carbon dioxide, CO2.
Right. And to truly understand the cognitive impact of this, we have to look at controlled, double-blind laboratory exposure studies.
Okay, lay it out.
The most notable is the landmark QHUX study, conducted jointly by researchers at Harvard University, SUNY Upstate Medical, and Syracuse University. They wanted to rigorously measure how standard, everyday indoor air quality affects higher-order human intelligence.
The methodology of the study is brilliant. They put human subjects, specifically knowledge workers, into simulated office environments and tested their cognitive function over several days.
Without the subjects knowing the air was changing.
Right. They manipulated the air quality in secret. They compared subjects working in conventional building environments, which they defined as having CO2 levels around 950 parts per million and high VOCs, against subjects in what they call green plus environments.
And those green plus buildings had massively enhanced ventilation. They were pulling in 40 cubic feet per minute of outdoor air per person.
Which dropped the ambient CO2 down to 600 ppm, right? And they utilized low VOC materials.
Exactly. And for context, 950 ppm of CO2 is completely standard for a modern office meeting room or a typical school classroom.
The empirical results demonstrated a staggering cognitive bifurcation. Participants in the well-ventilated low CO2 environments exhibited overall cognitive performance scores that averaged 101% higher than those trapped in the conventional 950 ppm settings.
101% higher. Let's break those specific metrics down, because the domains they tested are the exact executive skills required to sustain and navigate a complex civilization.
Okay, let's hear the breakdown.
In crisis response, which is the ability to plan, prepare, and react rationally to emergency scores, were 131% higher in the enhanced green environment.
Wow.
In information usage, the capacity to gather, analyze, synthesize, and apply data to actually solve complex problem scores were 299% higher when the air was clean.
299%.
And for strategy formulation, the ability to conceptualize complex solutions, anticipate outcomes, and optimize resource allocation scores were 288% higher.
288% higher. I mean, these aren't marginal gains. This isn't just a slight boost. It's the difference between being a genius and being completely cognitively impaired.
It's monumental.
It's like trying to run a high-performance sports car on an oxygen-starved engine. If you don't have the air intake, the engine just chokes and sputters.
Exactly right.
These findings irrefutably prove that what we currently consider to be benign, totally standard, acceptable indoor air quality for modern offices, government buildings, and schools is actively suffocating our strategic capacity.
We are doing it to ourselves to save on heating bills.
By voluntarily living and working in poorly ventilated boxes, We are subjected to a continuous, low-grade asphyxiation that literally cripples our ability to respond to complex civilizational crises.
So we are trapped in poorly ventilated boxes that suppress our strategy and crisis response. We are staring at screens that degrade our memory and executive function.
Right.
We're eating neurotoxic diets that shrink our hippocampus, and our brains are accumulating plastic that causes cellular explosions.
It's a nightmare.
But the final, and perhaps most tragic, defining characteristic of the Homo sapiens Moronus phenotype is that despite existing in a state of constant, relentless digital hyperconnectivity, we are suffering from profound physical isolation.
The paradox of hyperconnected isolation. We are
Yeah.
constantly texting, emailing, liking, and tweeting, and yet biologically, we are entirely, devastatingly alone. And the human brain did not evolve to be alone. It is deeply, inherently a social organ.
The neuroscience behind this revolves around the social brain network. This is an intricate, highly demanding neural architecture that includes the medial prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the temporoparietal junction.
The social brain.
Right. These brain structures evolved on the savanna to rely on continuous, meaningful, face-to-face interpersonal contact within a tribe. They need the subtle, subconscious processing of microexpressions, body language, pheromones, and physical touch to maintain their structural integrity and optimal function.
In evolutionary terms, isolation from the tribe meant certain death. You would be eaten or you would starve. So when you remove that physical social contact, whether through objective physical isolation, like living alone and working remotely, or just subjective loneliness despite being around people, the brain doesn't just feel sad.
No, it's not just an emotion.
It perceives that isolation as a severe, chronic biological threat to its very survival. It activates alarm systems identical to those triggered if you were being actively chased by a predator.
And the physiological fallout from this perceived chronic threat is rapid and structurally devastating. Extensive MRI studies utilizing massive data sets, like the UK Biobank, which analyzed over 40,000 human subjects.
40,000.
Yes. They reveal that social isolation correlates directly with a smaller total brain volume and reduced regional gray matter density.
The brain is physically shrinking from loneliness.
Yes.
The paper details specific architectural collapses here. The prefrontal cortex atrophies, fundamentally compromising emotional regulation and impulse control.
Which, by the way, perfectly sets you up to be victimized by the outrage algorithms we talked about earlier.
Oh, wow, because you don't have the prefrontal brakes to stop yourself from lashing out.
Exactly. You are primed for it.
The chronic stress of isolation floods the brain with cortisol, causing massive shrinkage in the hippocampus and the amygdala.
And we also see a terrifying 30% increase in white matter lesions in socially isolated individuals.
Lesions, like actual damage.
Yes, these are microscopic areas of permanent brain damage and neural necrosis, which drastically increases the imminent risk of severe dementia. The structural cables are snapping.
But the brain tries to cope, right? Like, it recognizes it is isolated and it tries to adapt, which leads to this phenomenon Franzen highlights called default mode network, or DMN overdrive.
Yes, the DMN. The default mode network is a higher associative network linked to mentalizing, imagination, daydreaming, and rumination.
Okay.
In a socially starved individual, the brain paradoxically upregulates the DMN. The functional communication within this network becomes much stronger, burning a lot of metabolic energy.
Why does it do that?
The working theory in neuroscience is that the isolated brain hyperactivates the DMN to mentally hallucinate or simulate the missing social interactions. It is frantically trying to fill the void of the tribe.
It's daydreaming social interaction.
Right.
So if the brain is essentially hallucinating social contact to soothe itself, why does it lead to such extreme paranoia and anxiety instead of comfort?
Because it lacks genuine social calibration.
Calibration.
Yeah. In the real world, face-to-face feedback allows you to course-correct your mental models. If you think someone is angry with you, you look at their face, you see they're actually smiling, and your brain downregulates the threat.
Oh, I see.
But without real-time physical feedback to check those simulations, the isolation-induced hallucination triggers what neuroscientists term social paranoia circuits.
Ah, so because you are isolated and flooded with cortisol, the amygdala stays hypervigilant. During the very few real social encounters you actually do have, or even the digital ones you engage in, your brain is constantly scanning for threats. You start misinterpreting completely neutral stimuli as hostile. Someone doesn't reply to a text fast enough, and your brain assumes they hate you.
Precisely. It creates a fertile biological ground for online tribalism, conspiracy theorization, and rapid algorithmic radicalization.
Mm.
You assume hostility where none exists because your uncalibrated social network is running in a constant state of simulated threat.
And the final nail in the coffin of this entire evolutionary process, the thing that guarantees the phenotype takes hold, is what isolation does to BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
Right.
We mentioned it briefly with the microplastics, but it comes back here in a devastating way.
It does. BDNF is the critical protein responsible for neuronal survival, the growth of new synapses, and overall neuroplasticity. It is the miracle grow of the brain.
And chronic isolation fundamentally suppresses the brain's production of BDNF.
It shuts it down.
So think about this horrific synergy. Not only are we actively damaging the brain with digital lobotomies, UPF diets, carbon dioxide asphyxiation, and nanoplastic cytoskeletal damage.
Right.
But the social isolation stops the brain from producing the exact protein it needs to repair that daily damage. The loss of BDNF permanently cements the degraded state of the brain. We completely lose our biological capacity to heal.
Which brings us to the formalization of the phenotype. If we rapidly summarize the 5 pillars of Homo sapiens Moronus as defined by Franson's 2026 proposal, the picture is undeniable.
Let's recap them. Pillar 1, spatial incompetence. Right hippocampal atrophy and localized metabolic acidosis induced by chronic GPS reliance. It strips us of our allocentric mapping skills and our physical autonomy.
Pillar 2, executive and mnemonic failure. Digital dementia via the reversal of neuroplasticity and outsourced memory and profound cognitive asphyxiation from standard indoor CO2 levels that destroy our crisis response and strategic capacity.
Pillar 3, algorithmic emotional volatility, a complete lack of prefrontal inhibitory control, where our emotional states are continuously driven by operant algorithmic conditioning, dopamine hijacking, and a hyperreactive amygdala.
Pillar 4, toxicological saturation. A metabolically dysregulated brain, physically permeated by synthetic nanoplastics causing cell explosion and Alzheimer's scaffolding, and persistently inflamed by ultra-processed food, creating a leaky gut-brain axis.
And Pillar 5, pathological isolation. A shrinking total brain volume, upregulated social paranoia networks, a 30% increase in white matter lesions, and the collapse of empathy due to physical hyperconnection without genuine human contact.
When you look at the totality of this report, you are struck by the ultimate tragic irony of our species. We are witnessing an organism possessing unparalleled apex intelligence, utilizing that very intelligence to engineer an environment that systematically selects against its own higher-order cognition.
We are doing it to ourselves.
We are orchestrating a population-level collapse of cognitive reserve in rational civic discourse. The physiological hardware required to sustain a complex, cooperative civilization is being dismantled from within by our own technological and environmental creations.
It is a self-inflicted extinction of our intellect. We have built a world that is perfectly designed to dismantle our cognitive autonomy. And since our brains are biologically losing the capacity to repair themselves through the suppression of BDNF, it brings up a terrifying question.
The ultimate question.
One that Franson leaves hanging, and the one I want to leave with you. If the architecture of our modern world is this perfectly tuned to devolve us, is the emergence of Homo sapiens Moronus a reversible condition, or are we already past the evolutionary point of no return?
It's hard to say.
Look at the device in your hand right now. Look at
really-
the screen you are probably holding while listening to this deep dive, and ask yourself, who is domesticating who?
Wow.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We are Bald and Bonkers Network, LLC, and we highly encourage you to step outside today, leave your GPS behind, turn off the screen, find a friend to talk to face, and breathe some fresh, unrecycled air. Your brain literally depends on it.